The movie commences in an isolated institution where inmates receive psychological treatment each time they're awakened from their slumber. Dr. David, one of the facility's leading psychotherapists, is in conversation with a prisoner who has just been roused from his sleep and shows him a video of his daughter expressing her devastation after he was accused of killing his wife. The inmate is distressed by the video and continues to insist to the doctor that he was falsely accused of the crime and did not actually murder his spouse. David acknowledges the man's remorse, claiming he handled the situation very professionally during their session. The prisoner returns to sleep in a small chamber filled with water while David observes the process. The person responsible for overseeing the slumbering individuals, known as Valley, informs him that he can discern the prisoner's deeds simply by studying their expressions. Valley speculates that the man being put to sleep may have been entangled in a crime of intense emotion. When David jests about Valley taking over his job, the caretaker clarifies that he derives joy from tending to their unconscious bodies and would willingly entrust these unfortunate souls to him. Surprised by Valley's words, David remarks that he's making him sound like a priest. Valley concurs, pointing out that the inmates confess their transgressions to him, and he would guide them toward seeking penance. After bidding farewell to the pod, David heads home and washes away the weariness of the day. When he steps out of the shower, he finds his girlfriend, Viola, playing a petite piano while perched on their bed. After he admires the musical piece she composed, the two share a kiss and tumble onto the bed. The next morning, when David awakens, he discovers Viola gazing at a photo he had concealed within a book. With a pained expression on her face, she inquires if it's his ex in the picture, noticing how it has troubled her. David offers an apology, assuring her that he didn't mean to hurt her feelings, and he expresses his affection for her during their conversation. While they are talking, he receives a call from Voli, who urges him to come down to the common room immediately. Vol introduces David to Andrea, who offers a quick apology for the abrupt summons. Andrea explains that he had come early to take over David's role in a month and wanted to observe him in action. Later, David has a conversation with the head of the facility and expresses his astonishment upon learning that he is going to be replaced. She clarifies that he has served there longer than anyone else, and she believes it's vital to safeguard his mental well-being, as continuing to absorb so much emotional pain every day could be detrimental to his health. The next day, Andrea accompanies David in his sessions and begins to inquire about the nature of the work. When asked about the images displayed on the large monitor, David elucidates that they are pictures selected by the prisoners themselves to help anchor them. The prisoner who had been roused from her slumber is a woman sentenced to 9 years of sleep. With care, he reminds the woman of the tragic incident, explaining that she had unintentionally caused the deaths of 2 young boys while driving on slick asphalt with a few drinks in her system. The woman recollects her dreadful deed and is overwhelmed by shock. However, she manages to regain her composure swiftly. After work, David takes Viola out to dinner and shares details about his job. Viola graciously offers her home as temporary accommodation until he finds a place to rent, to which David agrees. The following day, David returns from his jog and heads to his office, only to find Andrea waiting there. Andrea informs him that a prisoner had experienced an emergency awakening due to an empty file. As David examines the file, he realizes that Andrea was correct. There was indeed no record of the man in their system. As they search for answers, the smug prisoner addresses David, asserting that he knows who he is and why he's there. However, the prisoner remains unwilling to share the information, even though he expresses a desire to be put back to sleep. Andrea argues that they can't do so until they complete the required tests. Instructing Andrea to keep a close watch on the prisoner, David proceeds to the area where the inmates store their personal belongings. He attempts to open the locker, but his keycard refuses to work. Suddenly, the blaring alarms capture David's attention, and he rushes to the pod, where he discovers a red light. Andrea is standing in front of it. After reprimanding Andrea for leaving the prisoner unattended, David swiftly rectifies the issue with the woman's oxygen tank. When Viola arrives, she overhears the heated argument between the 2 men and decides to intervene, pulling out a gun to maintain control until the situation is resolved. As they all reach David's office, they find Viola tending to the prisoner who is pretending to be injured. When Viola attempts to check the man's health, the prisoner seizes the opportunity, grabbing the gun and shooting her in the chest. He then takes Viola hostage, holding the gun perilously close to her head, forcing David to handcuff himself to a chair. After David handcuffs himself, an unexpected and bewildering turn of events unfolds. Viola and the prisoner begin to kiss, leaving David utterly confounded. Unexpectedly, the prisoner starts choking Viola, his grip tightening around her neck. In a desperate bid to save her, David manages to free his hand and stabs the prisoner in the neck, instantly ending the threat. Suddenly he awakens, finding himself seated in an all-too-familiar chair, his head freshly shaven. Dr. Dottera is by his side, asking if he remembers anything. He tells her that he knows he is in prison for killing a prisoner, and he gazes at the picture of Viola that he had chosen to keep. Dr. Dottera inquires if he remembers how he and Viola had first crossed paths, and David's memory takes him back to their initial encounter in his office. Viola had visited with her son to leave a message for her incarcerated father. David learned that Viola's son had insisted on coming, and later, he discovered that her husband, Carlo, was a neurologist who had committed a murder. Sometime later, David decided to search for Viola and found out that she was part of a string quartet. After attending one of their performances and waiting for her outside, he struck up a conversation with her, complimenting her musical talent. He inquired about her son and offered to buy her drinks at the bar, to which she revealed that she hadn't been going out much. As David recollects their relationship, he mentions how Viola had eventually invited him to her house for a glass of wine, and that evening, they ended up being intimate. However, when he proceeds to explain how he had killed Viola's husband, the doctor corrects him and reveals the actual narrative. The doctor informs David that after he and Viola had been dating for 11 months, she met a man who claimed to know her husband well and asserted that all the evidence against Carlo was planted. Viola implored David to scrutinize the files to establish Carlo's innocence. However, David seemingly declined, erasing all the files related to Carlo, causing others to believe that the pod was unoccupied. In a desperate and guilt-ridden moment, David disconnects the oxygen tank, intending for himself to suffocate, convinced that Viola would eventually move on. However, he soon realizes that his actions not only caused Carlo's death, but also led to the death of another prisoner. The doctor informs David that he still has 10 years left on his sentence, but can serve it on parole. David has already served 10 years and is now eligible for the reintegration program, provided he follows every instruction meticulously. He is provided with an apartment and informed that he must attend weekly support group meetings. Additionally, he must sign in every day and is prohibited from leaving the city. Under the terms of his parole, a police officer could enter David's home for a search at any time, and he could be summoned to the precinct on short notice. Weeks later, David secures a job as a hotel clerk, but one night, on his way home from work, he spots a poster indicating that Viola is performing at a club. He hesitates and feels nervous, eventually deciding to leave. However, he's halted by the sound of his name. Viola, with a hint of anger in her voice, confronts David, expressing her belief that he was released too early after what he had done. She tells him that he had subjected her to many troublesome years and pleads for him to never show his face to her again, leaving David feeling deeply ashamed. One night, David leaves his apartment, and his old friend Voli pays him a visit, noticing his troubled state. Voli seems concerned and hands over his gun, warning David that there are people out there who might wish to harm him. He advises David to take the weapon to protect himself. A few days later, David stumbles upon a picture of a fountain left in his house, which raises his suspicions. He decides to investigate, and while looking around, he unexpectedly encounters Anna's husband, a former prisoner and patient who is believed to have died when David disconnected the oxygen from Viola's husband's pod. After speaking with the husband, David learns that Anna had been investigating the prison system while she was actually incarcerated, and she had been collaborating with Carlo. This revelation leads David to Viola's house. David pleads with Viola to listen to him and shares the findings of his investigation. Both of them become increasingly certain that they have been set up. Viola mentions that the man who had contacted her about her husband's innocence was connected to the ministers group, responsible for the creation of Hypersleep. They locate the man as he is leaving his office and inquire about the innocent people wrongfully imprisoned. He confirms their suspicions, revealing that he too was innocent. However, he issues a stern warning, advising David and Viola to never seek him out, as it could be dangerous for all of them. Viola and David rekindle their love after uncovering the truth, and Viola apologizes for involving him in the first place by asking for his help that night. The two of them share a passionate night together. As David is heading back to his car, he stumbles upon a memory device hidden inside the hat he had retrieved after his release from prison. He opens it on his phone and discovers a video of himself conversing with Carlo. In the video, Carlo reveals that the inmates are fed false dreams while they sleep, explaining that he didn't actually murder his wife, contrary to what everyone believed, and that he was framed for the crime. Amidst the chaos, David hears screaming and witnesses two men forcibly dragging Viola out of her house and shoving her into a car. He tails the vehicle to a grand mansion where a gala is in full swing. Sneaking his way inside, he spots Andrea, now a renowned doctor, and confronts him, pulling him aside. Andrea confesses that he was the one responsible for the deaths of those prisoners, but David had unwittingly condemned them to their fate by reopening old files. Taking Andrea hostage, he drags him out in front of President Costa, demanding Viola's release. David attempts to expose how hypersleep erodes a person's identity, but Costa argues that it has made the streets safer for everyone. From another room, Viola is brought inside by a police officer and handed off to David. The smug president smirks and tells David to enjoy his new life. Furious, David points his gun at Costa, but Viola intervenes, asking him to take her home. As David exits, he experiences a hallucination of his deceased wife, and suddenly, everything turns bright. The scene shifts, and David finds himself back in the facility, being examined by the doctor. He recalls everything and insists he is innocent, claiming to have evidence hidden inside his hat. Understanding his disorientation, the doctor explains that the evidence against him was overwhelming, and there was little he could have done. She soothes his concerns and reveals that he had served a long sentence, spending 35 years in hypersleep, now marking his 80th birthday. The doctor hands him a mirror, and David is taken aback by his incredibly aged face. She assures him that he will complete his sentence in a year and become a free man. After putting him back to sleep, the doctor checks David's belongings and discovers the memory card hidden in his hat. A look of shock crosses her face as she contemplates the truth in David's words. The camera then guides us through the storage unit, where hundreds of thousands of incarcerated individuals are held, each dreaming about something they've been told. It comes to a stop in front of David's chamber, focusing on his withered face that has been in hypersleep for 35 years. Inside David's head, he dreams of going for a jog, just like he used to, and returning home to find Viola. She tells him it took him a lifetime to get there, and he smiles lovingly, responding that he's there now. The movie comes to an end, leaving us with this poignant moment of reconciliation.